Avatar: The Last Airbender is a show beloved in large part due to its intricately developed characters who have stood for the test of time nearly 20 years later. But one of the show's most iconic is Azula. Azula is the heir to the Fire Nation throne and has been playing for it since she was a child. She has schemed her whole life to get what she wants, which makes her such an interesting villain. Add to that her close relations with the show's antagonist turned hero Zuko. Azula stands out as one of the show's greatest characters, and for that very reason, today we'll discuss Now, Azula, just like Zuko, is a child of Ozai, and that means she also would have had a very difficult childhood, even if she refused to admit it until her breakdown at the end of the show. I won't say she suffered as much as Zuko, seeing as her father didn't banish her for years, but she had it rough in different ways, specifically problems with her mother. Ursa was the mother of Zuko and Azula, and clearly preferred Zuko, although of course Ozai much preferred Azula, so it was more or less balanced out, except Ozai lived longer, so in the long term, Azula had it much better. But contrary to what Azula tells us, Ursa never really hated Azula, but just the rage inside of her. The reason as to why Ursa preferred Zuko so much is because there was kindness in him, and she tried to keep him from suppressing that, as happened after she died. Ursa tried to find the kindness in Azula, but she just couldn't. One thing I find so interesting about young Azula was that even as a child, she was scheming for the throne. When Iroh, the next in line for the throne, had failed at Ba Sing Se, Azula urged her father to use that mistake, which cost the life of her cousin, as a chance to achieve the throne, which would get her even closer to power. But, as we see also in the Agni Kai between Zuko and Ozai, Azula was grinning ear to ear. She knows her brother won't fight her father, and when Zuko is punished in whatever way, it'll make her next in line from the throne. We, of course, also see Azula being super manipulative as a child. She convinces Ursa in one episode to force Zuko to play with Azula and her friends, even though it was more closer to just torturing Zuko. And the fact that Ursa knows about this nefarious side of Azula and still falls for it just shows how good at manipulating that Azula really is. That is the majority of what we see of Azula's childhood in the show, to say she's like 14, 15 while the show is happening. From this point on, we don't see Azula until the beginning of Season 2, where she reunites with her brother and uncle. At her introduction in this episode, it's just perfect as a representation of what Azula is as a character. She manipulated Zuko into lowering his guard and lied to him that his father wanted him home. While Azula and a few firebenders could have easily overpowered Zuko in an ambush, Azula went out of her way to emotionally torture Zuko, whether if it's one they found out when he left, like what happened in the episode, or once he arrived and his father just immediately changed him up. Later in the season, we see how Azula manipulates Ty Lee into joining Azula's strike team. She arrives, she learns Ty Lee's fears, and then uses them against her almost immediately until she can make Ty Lee think that she's joining on her own terms, although, of course, she's losing. Time and time again, we see Azula try to manipulate both those close to her as well as her enemies, and it works a lot of the time. During Day of Black Sun, a now very disciplined Sokka, I want to emphasize that, at the start of the show he's reckless, but now he's very disciplined. He still breaks when Azula mentions how she is torturing Suki, even though Azula is powerless at the moment and Sokka could defeat her. But the next important moment in the character of Azula is in Ba Sing Se at the end of Season 2. At the start of the season, we see Azula try to convince Zuko that she is on her side, and now at the end, she manages to convince him. And even worse, she gets Zuko to turn on Uncle Iroh, the real father figure to Zuko. In this moment, when she manipulated Zuko, she didn't just get Zuko to do what she wanted, she got Zuko to betray his morals, which utterly destroyed him for the first half of Season 2, all the way up until the Day of Black Sun arc, when he kind of reforms and says, "Screw you, father," and goes and joins the Avatar. And when they get home, even though now Zuko is on her side, at just the slightest inkling that she may have failed the mission and Avatar is alive, she throws Zuko under the bus so early there would be no evidence of her altering the truth. It really shows the intelligence of Azula. While if the Avatar is dead, she won't get all the glory, which she already has a surplus of it. But if the Avatar's alive, she gets a lot more blame taken off her, which makes her look even better. It's a brilliant strategic move, but such a cruel one, especially to Zuko, who needs all the support he can right now, coming home on these shaky grounds. But as Season 3 continues, we see Azula in a more comfortable position than the previous season, where she is back in her kingdom, and all that power fight she has is amplified by her pampered life, and we get to see a lot more of her psychology. One of the biggest examples of this is in the episode called The Beach, a beloved episode. Even though in all aspects it should have just been considered filler, it did a great job of developing the Fire Nation royal teen characters. In this episode, we see how socially inept Azula is when it comes to situations not based on power hierarchies, at least physical power. This episode explores how broken Zuko and Azula are as they try to navigate a teenage beach party. Azula's winner-takes-all and manipulative mindset, while working great inside of war or government, is seen as just creepy and off-putting in a social setting, which makes sense. Azula isn't even the center of attention in her friend group, with Ty Lee being admired for her looks and cheery personality. Of course, Azula blames everything around her not being able to admit weakness. She verbally abuses Ty Lee to the point of crying and burns down the house of the party just to exert her power. Let's take a moment to breathe for a second, because I have a request for you guys. If you have 3 seconds, please just hit that subscribe button. It won't inherently help you, but it gets me a lot closer to monetization, which means I'll have the resources for higher quality videos, which you can enjoy. So please subscribe, and thank you to everyone who already has. But as everything falls apart as Sozin's comet approaches for Azula. First, now a second family member is turned against her, with Zuko joining Team Avatar. But we also have Mai and Ty Lee turn on Azula soon. When Azula tried to kill Zuko in the Boiling Rock, although Mai had her heart broken by Zuko, she still defends him, and Ty Lee, wanting to protect her real friend in Mai, stands against Azula as well. These people would rather fight for what they love than live in fear under Azula's thumb, making Azula's power just fall to pieces. And with Azula now feeling vulnerable, and that she is out of control, while she's finally gaining the throne she sought for so long, she begins to have a mental breakdown. While Azula is a horrible person, it's still sad to see her fall apart so utterly, and just a tad bit terrifying as well. She did have a bad upbringing, which shaped her into the monster we saw on screen, but she's also a horrible person, so it balances out. But it doesn't make her defeat at the hands of Zuko any less satisfying. In summary, Azula got her power by oppressing others and making them hate themselves. But in the end, she was defeated not by being outsmarted by the enemy, but by their compassion overpowering their fear of her. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you want more Avatar content from me. At the moment, I have a video discussing the positives of the upcoming Avatar live-action series, which I think you should check out. It's right there. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been Fictional Fanatics. I will see you in that other Avatar video that I just mentioned. But until then, I will see you. Bye!